Hi, I had made a video earlier where I was explaining how you can eyeball a design and roughly construct 3 rooms and make it into a 3D and then view it and then play around with it and so on and so forth. In that video, I had indicated that I am not talking about very precise locations of all these objects or precise location of the architect moving around on that site, and I said that I will explain that later, and this is that particular video where you will see that you can use TAD for very precise work, extremely precise work, without forcing you to be precise all the time. And that's the whole idea of a design system which works from very early stages of design. What is the point of designing when you're not allowed to make mistakes in the logic of whatever you're doing, because your mind is free flowing. When you're designing, you could be starting from many different ways, and you can't say that no, you should not start like that, this is the way you should start, and you should always have window openings into a wall. If you don't have a wall, how can you have a window opening? That's not how designing happens. Designing is a emergence of the final design coming out of a lot of mess, and then from there you sift and sort and discuss and argue with yourself, argue with your colleagues, and then argue on logical things, not on top of things like graphics and graphic commands. That's not where your arguments are. Your arguments would be things like, should this living room be here, should that bedroom be there, should it be on the first floor, second floor, whatever your design may be. And that does do designing at all scales. So usually I give examples in terms of buildings, but you could do interiors, you could even make an object if you so want to. So here is TAD now open, where you can actually see that I have just closed the splash screen and the tips dialog, and I am about to start a new model. So let me do that. I click on that particular button right at the first button on the top toolbar over there. By the way, these toolbars could be located at very different locations on your computer. So I don't know where they are exactly on your own computer, but I'm sure you'll be able to find out there are not many toolbars. One nice thing about TAD is that there are nothing much more than what you can see in front of you. All the commands are right there, and that's all what you have to really learn. There is nothing much more than that. Now, as you may have seen in the earlier video, I had explained about the architect and these two helpers, and let me kind of revise that information again, because these three personalities are never seen in any other CAD software. So people who have got experience with, say, AutoCAD or SketchUp or 3ds Max, you will find that all those software actually has only the mouse and nothing else which is there. Whereas what TAD does is that it gives you these three personalities so that you can go ahead with your design very fast. Why so? Because it's a way of telling that, you know what, I am right now focused on this particular object, and you train your brain to know what is that object which that software is focused on. So you reduce the time needed to become familiar with what are you connected with. You may have seen in certain text editors or word processors, you'll see a blinking line, right? The line keeps blinking, and then you know that when you type something, it will be coming on that blinking line there. That is the way it works, right? That's the way word processors work, where you can actually make out where that particular that particular typed character is appearing. Okay, I'm sorry, I'm a little distracted on this because I have this 2 monitor setup, and that sometimes misbehaves. The mouse cursor disappears, and that's irritating. When the mouse cursor disappears or that caret stops blinking and you have a completely blank screen, it does happen sometimes in some word processor, and you're lost. You do not know where you are and where would be the next letter which you'll type. There are times when you thought that the letter should have come on this part, but then it turns out that it appears somewhere else, and then the carrots start blinking there. It's really very irritating. So along the same lines, if in graphics program all you had was your mouse and nothing else, then half the time you are actually teaching that software where are you located, and you're clicking on things and then you're seeing the grips over there, and then you go about doing it. That doesn't happen in TAD. In TAD, these helpers are always telling you that, okay, I am on in this particular case, I am on Chajja, and that Chajja is placed on the first floor. So you are comforted. You don't need to solve that particular problem at all. You would take the architect and move that architect around in many different locations, and as that architect is moved around, you'll find that it actually gives you information here. This is called the info pane, and PANE, that is, and that pane, like a window pane, that is, you will see that there are various dimensions and areas which are related to wherever the helpers are. The helpers and the architect are always going to be there inside a TAD model. You'll have to, that's a given, that's a concept by which it works. Now you can very precisely locate the architect at, say for example, I want to locate the architect at this particular corner. I can just Control J that, and it can actually precisely locate itself on that particular corner. Okay, so that you can do with this particular button also, the fourth button here. These 4 buttons are for snapping the architect at various locations. If you press this button, it snaps to the first helper. So the architect is now shifted and precisely located itself to the first helper. This one locates itself to the second helper. And if the architect is somewhere else, and this is where the helpers are, if you press this, that is snap to the foot of the perpendicular containing the line where the helpers are, then that's where the architect will go. So you have this 4 different ways by which you can snap the architect very precisely, and that gives more control over what is the information which you are getting here. So that's one very straightforward way by which you precisely locate architect on inside TAD. Now there is another way which I many times don't use because I'm a free-form kind of thinker, but I do respect people who want to use kind of a modular grid. So they'll put they'll sketch out on a dotted paper or a graph paper or something like that. So you can do that here also. So you just switch on the grid by going to the preferences, and once this grid is switched on, now the architect will always snap onto the nearest grid. Okay, so this is another way by which the architect is moved around. And not just that, when you're drawing an object the way I showed in my earlier video, what it will do is it will snap the bottom left corner to the nearest grid, and the other 2 dimensions, the width and height, would be made on number of units which that grid is consuming. So if you have marked out a particular rectangle which is consumed, say 3.75 such grid units, then it will actually snap to the 4th grid unit, and so you'll always get multiples of the grid size which is there. So as you can see, it is actually snapped here clearly, and this length is exactly a multiple and this height is exactly a multiple of that particular grid size. Now it may not look as if it is snapped correctly. That's because of a detailed thing which happens inside. All CAD software has this situation where it has to convert numbers like 3.986395 into integers. Okay, because the screen is a set of integers. It's got dots over there. It can't handle anything halfway in between, and that's why you may think that it is not as per the grid size, but if you zoom in enough, you will find that it is actually on the grid. Okay, now or you can measure it yourself, and you'll see that the current length is 2.875 from what I can make out from here, and the grid size is 0.115. So you'll see that that is actually divisible by 0.115. If you want, you can check that. So let's do that. Let's take the calculator and see 2.875 divided by 0.115, and you'll find that it is exactly 25 grid modules. So it does do in multiples of that. So there are 25 units of the grid here, and whatever that particular height also would be as at that grid units. So this is another way by which you can actually create precise sizes of shapes if you want to. I personally don't use this feature much, but I know people who do, and therefore I respect that, and that capability is there. Now you may wonder, what is that grid size? I forgot to tell you this. The grid size is actually the size of that architect itself, right? The architect is now sized at 0.115, and if I were to park the caret here, I just discussed about the caret, that blinking line which you see. Now I park that caret here, then I can move the architect around by just pressing the arrow key. So the one jump of the arrow key where the architect takes is actually the precise dimension, which comes to the next point by which you can very precisely locate objects. Many times I can use the architect itself as a spacer. Suppose I use architect's dimension as 0.115, which I often do because the internal walls of rooms in New Bombay, they're all 115 mm, which is 4.5 inch more or less. So this 115 is kind of a unit which is seen many times. Now what I do is, let me zoom a little bit here and then you can see it for yourself, is that I can keep the architect at a particular location and snap an object in such a way that it is precisely located on one of the four corners of that architect. So I can snap it to the top left corner, or I can snap it to the top right corner. Sorry, I think I accidentally shifted the architect itself. So and if I right click on that architect, it moves back to its earlier location. It's like an undo for the architect. So now I go to the top right corner and the object is snapped over there, and now I am snapping the object to the bottom right, and now I can snap it to the bottom left corner. So there you have it. This is another way by which you can very precisely relocate objects and resize it based on your dimensions. Sorry, I didn't show you the resizing part that I can that you will come to know very soon. Now there is another way by which I can shift the architect. So I've temporarily shifted it somewhere here, but let's say I want to resize this particular object. Okay, let me move this guy somewhere here, this object somewhere here, and now suppose I want to make this exactly, say, what is the current dimension? It is 2.875. Suppose I want that dimension to be 2.5. okay, so what I do is that I just type 2.5 and say angle of 0. So what TAD does, it takes the architect, figures out the angle, 0 being the angle to the right of that first helper, and it moves exactly 2.5 meters from there. So I move it over there. Now I know that this point is exactly 2.5 meters, which you can verify with the perpendicular distance here. It says 2.5. Now what I do is that I use this button. I can use F3 or F4 keys, hotkeys, and make sure that the helpers are on this edge, because I want to now stretch that so that it meets that location of the architect. Now that command is this one, which is this particular button. It says stretch the current side. So I just stretch that, and there you have it. I have precisely resized it to 2.5 meters. So I gave you two commands here. One is the way to move the architect to a precise location using a dimension, a space, the angle sign. This is what I had written. In fact, I'll show you. So I wrote 2.5. Whatever your earlier commands are there, they're all shown here also. So 2.5 space angle 0. So it preserves the history of your various commands which you use. Suppose you want to repeat them later. Like suppose you want to use the same command and I want to make it square. So I'll say minus 90 degrees. So the architect will go down here with respect to the first helper to 2.5 meters down there. Now I press enter. So this is now 2.5 meters, and I again press the stretch command, and now you have a perfect square which is 2.5 meters by 2.5 meters. So this is another way by which you can get precision, by which you are basically commanding the architect to move to particular dimensions. Another way by which architect can be moved is, say suppose I want to move the architect diagonally. So I'll snap exactly to this particular corner here, and now I don't know what the angle here is. I mean, I can find out through Pythagoras theorem and all that, but let's say I don't want to know also. I know that this is snapped here and the first helper is here, so there is a imaginary line you can join from the first helper to the architect. And now I'll say 2.5. I don't give any angle, nothing. I just press enter. So what it does is this particular length now from here to here is exactly 2.5 meters. So it extrapolates on the same line and then puts the architect on the dimension. Now what I'll do is that I'll stretch both these edges. So what I'll do is I'll use F3 and I'll stretch this here, and then I'll again press F3 and I stretch that here. Now what has happened, I've got a square where the diagonal is actually 2.5 meters. So you can see that for yourself. I shifted the helper using F3 and F4. You can use these two hotkeys to move the helpers around on the same object. And now when the helper is here, I can see the dimension from this corner to this corner by this distance, which is the architect distance. It is saying 2.5 meters. So you have two basic methods by which an architect can be moved using that command, that yellow command line which you saw. One is by just giving a number and pressing enter, in which case it extrapolates along the line from the architect to the first helper. Or you give a number, space, the angle sign, and a value which is the angle for which it will locate that architect as per that angle, dimension and angle. And this is more than enough to really locate the architect wherever very precisely. Mind you, the helper is making a big difference here. It is giving you like a temporary origin, as they say in AutoCAD and all. I think you can set something of this sort, but then you have to manually set it. Here it is always available because you can just shift the helpers to wherever you want it, and that origin point starts from that helper. Okay, so that is another way to do this. A third way which I want to show you is that once you locate the architect very precisely, let's say this architect was located here very precisely, you can move other object or objects. If you have selected many objects together, let's say I have selected all these three objects. Now I want to move this particular first helper to this point and relatively everything else also to be shifted. I can do that by using this particular key. So I can just click that and then button. So everything is relatively moved in such a way that that first helper is precisely on that particular architect and everything else is relative to that. Now TAD has got a beautiful undo system where each object has got its own undo. So now that I've selected all these three objects together, I can undo all the three together. And this undo feature is actually extremely useful because since each object has got its own undo history, you can go to a particular object and undo just that object. Say suppose I have I've done all these edits. I'll remove all the selection. Now I can undo only this particular object because that's a current object, so therefore it is the selected one. So if I can do that, it actually undoes just that particular object, okay, without affecting the other two which was also part of that edit history, which is another very powerful feature. Many times in CAD software, AutoCAD and many other software, you have carried out a series of edits and then you realize that you want to undo it, but then you don't want to lose something which you have edited. You want that edit to happen but not the rest, and then you're stuck because if you're undoing, it will undo in the same order as you have done something. I don't know why these people have never solved that problem. And invariably, you end up creating more and more files because you don't want to lose your work. So you'll save the file somewhere, then you will undo everything, and then you now got 2 files, and then you'll pick up that object from the earlier file. It's such a mess actually. That never happens in TAD. You are always working only on one file all the time. So the third thing which I want to show you is how do you rotate. So rotation can be done free form, so I can just rotate around the architect like this, and when I leave the mouse it will rotate, but I don't know now what angle it is unless I look at all these values here. But what if I were to rotate precisely around that architect? So I can just type 45, leave that command line open, don't press escape. When you press escape it will close, and then I just rotate, and now it is, I just give a kind of a just rotate arbitrarily and just leave it, and it will rotate it at 45 degrees because that's what I've written here. So this is a very precise way of rotating, so you don't have to think that, oh, did I rotate it, what is the angle to which I rotated it, nothing like that. It will rotate very precisely to that. So I can do this, and now I can do it again, and each time it will rotate it at 45 degrees. The only disadvantage, if you want to call it a disadvantage, is, sorry, let me go back, I accidentally zoomed down. The only disadvantage is that it will always, now in case of 45, it is a positive number, so it will always go anti-clockwise. So even if I rotate in this direction, okay, it will still rotate in the positive direction, that is anti-clockwise direction only, even though I may have shown the rotation as clockwise, it will still go anti-clockwise. That is how this particular command works. But if you were to do it free form, there is no such a restriction. It will follow the way you have rotated that object. So this is a very precise way by which you can rotate objects, and you can locate the architect. I've shown you the way to do that, and you can use the grid, and you can move a set of objects precisely to various locations, and that's how you end up shaping the positioning of things. In another video, I'll show you how you can edit a particular shape and what all commands are there to edit that shape into whatever lovely shape you have in your mind. So TAD never really, since this particular mouse is on that zoom up mode, if I accidentally create a window, it will think that you're trying to zoom up, and therefore it executes that. That's what is happening. I am a little away from the monitor, so I'm not able to see very clearly. Since I'm recording this, I had to position my laptop in a particular way. So there you have it. This is what TAD does. I hope you are able to understand how TAD works and how you can very precisely create shapes. As you can see, TAD does not object if you do something illogical, like now this particular shape is intersecting the other, because these things do happen when you're sketching out a design where you have not yet fully firmed up on what you want to really do with your design, and TAD does not say no, you can't do this, this is not right, and this is not allowed. Nothing of that sort. It's a loose-limbed, loosely coupled system which is at work in TAD. So have I missed anything here? I spoke about the grid, I spoke about how the architect can be moved very precisely, how objects can be rotated, how objects can be moved very precisely, how you can do selection and then move that. Selection actually works, many of the commands works with selection also, but I'll probably do another video on how to use the selection feature. I gave you an idea about the undo. I think I pretty much covered another bunch of topics inside TAD. I hope you start using TAD really well, and you can always write to me in the community. My name is Sabu Francis, and you can always talk to me. I'm always available. Thank you very much.